In meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister, former President Trump vowing to bring peace to the Middle East if he's reelected for another term at the White House. Comes a day after the Israeli leader met with President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. And joining us now live is NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tal. Good evening, Iris. So what did former President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu talk about today?
Good evening to you, Steve. In a readout of the meeting, former President Trump's campaign said that Prime Minister Netanyahu thanked former President Trump for his contribution to peace in the Middle East. They thanked President Trump for example, passing the Abraham Accord and also moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem and eliminating Soleimani. And Trump, meanwhile, pledged to make every effort he can to bring peace to the Middle East and combat anti-Semitism within the United States if and when he gets back to the White House. The meeting at Trump's Mar-a-Lago comes just a day after Netanyahu met with President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris separately at the White House. And Trump using today's opportunity to criticize Vice President Kamala Harris's comments after her meeting with Netanyahu, in which she reiterated the administration's support for Israel, but also expressed concerns over casualties in Gaza. Watch.
Israel has a right to defend itself, and how it does so matters. We cannot allow ourselves to become numb to the suffering, and I will not be silent.
I think her remarks were disrespectful. They weren't very nice, pertaining to Israel. I actually don't know how a person who's Jewish can vote for her.
Netanyahu, meanwhile, during Trump's meeting, responded by saying that he hopes Harris's comments will not affect the progress with a ceasefire deal. Watch.
To the extent that Hamas understands that there's no daylight between Israel and the United States, that expedites the deal. And I would hope that those comments don't change that.
Negotiations for a ceasefire deal are ongoing, and the administration says a deal is coming very close. And President Biden today spoke with the King of Jordan to discuss his ongoing efforts to secure a deal and also about preparations for ramping up humanitarian aid during a potential ceasefire period. Steve.
Perhaps we'll see some sort of breakthrough in the near future. In the meantime, Iris, Trump is shifting his focus to Vice President Harris. What's the latest with Harris's campaign?
So Vice President Kamala Harris today secured the endorsements from former President Barack Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama. And these two are pretty much the last remaining leaders of the Democratic Party to endorse Harris. Harris is set to pick her running mate by August 7th. And this upcoming weekend, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro is set to campaign for Harris in his battleground state. Meanwhile, former President Trump is set to hold a campaign rally in traditionally blue state of Minnesota, which he eyes to win this November. Steve.
NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tal reporting live from the White House. Thank you, Iris. And Congress is now in recess until mid-September. When lawmakers will return, they'll have 2 weeks to fund the government for another year. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has details on the appropriations process for fiscal year 2025.
The House Appropriations Committee has passed all 12 appropriation bills, but on the House floor, Republicans have only managed to pass 5 bills. The legislative branch failed, and the water and energy bill had to be pulled from a vote. When confronted with these shortcomings, House appropriators point their fingers at the Senate.
We're way ahead of the Senate. So, I mean, the question ought to be asked why the Democratic-controlled Senate hasn't brought a single bill to the floor yet.
House Republicans admit that their bills have been drafted on party lines, but insist that the process must play out regardless.
The Senate won't take up any conservative riders. They won't even take up the numbers. The Senate won't even conference with us. When's the last time we conferenced with the Senate? That's what you're supposed to do. We need to take the bills that are out of committee now, so they are our position in the committee level. Tell the Senate we want to sit down tomorrow.
Lawmakers, Republican and Democrat, expect to have to vote on a continuing resolution when Congress reconvenes in mid-September.
No, absolutely, it was not good. Kevin McCarthy got 7 of the 12 passed before he was wrongfully ousted, and then now Mike Johnson has gotten 5. They're probably going to be forcing us to vote on a CR. I won't be continuing Nancy Pelosi's budget from last Congress, which is what has been going on.
Since 1977, only in 4 occasions has Congress passed all 12 appropriation bills to fund government. On every other year, a minibus or an omnibus or a continuing resolution have had to be signed into law. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
2 of the world's most wanted alleged cartel leaders are now in U.S. custody after one of them helped the FBI in its sting operation. Both men now facing multiple charges, including making and trafficking lethal fentanyl. NTD's Melina Wisecup has the details.
The Sinaloa cartel is considered one of the most violent and powerful drug trafficking organizations in the world. Its co-founder, known as El Chapo, is currently serving a life sentence in a U.S. prison. And his son, Joaquin Guzman Lopez, helped the police to arrest the cartel's other co-founder, Ismael Zambada, known as El Mayo. He was led onto a plane by El Chapo's son, and authorities later arrested both men in El Paso, Texas on Thursday. Authorities consider Zambada to be one of the most consequential traffickers in Mexico's history. The drugs he's allegedly made and trafficked are said to be the leading cause of death in the U.S. for ages 18 to 45. Zambada appeared in court on Friday and pleaded not guilty to the charges against him.
He is facing charges for fentanyl trafficking, money laundering, firearms offenses, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder.
Guzman Lopez faces lesser charges for trafficking cocaine, heroin, and meth, among other drugs. Mexico's president asked for more details on Friday, saying the U.S. government must be transparent and give a full report on the arrest operation. Authorities say that arresting cartel leaders doesn't stop the flood of deadly drugs. Instead, it will likely lead to cartel infighting before a new leader takes over. Now the DOJ is vowing to continue the fight against drug trafficking.
The Justice Department will not rest until every single cartel leader, member, and associate responsible for poisoning our communities is held accountable.
Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
Lawmakers and industry leaders are opposing a planned electric vehicle battery plant in rural Michigan because of its ties to the Chinese Communist Party. They say the company profits from forced labor. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
Goshen High-Tech, an electric vehicle battery manufacturing company, is planning to open a new facility in Green Charter Township, Michigan, but it's facing pushback from lawmakers and others who say the company uses forced labor and is tied to the Chinese Communist Party.
I've said from the beginning that I want to see this area have more jobs and investment, but we must not welcome companies that are controlled by people who see us as the enemy.
The U.S. military has already banned Goshen batteries. Congressman Darren LaHood of Illinois voiced similar concerns about a Goshen plant in his state.
According to their own bylaws, Goshen is required to, quote, to carry out party activities in accordance with the Constitution of the CCP, unquote.
Goshen sells its batteries to well-known auto manufacturers in the U.S. at cheap prices. The panel says this is possible through forced labor.
The tie between forced labor and human rights abuses in China and Chinese industrial policy is precisely how Beijing cements and spreads its genocide. It's also how China makes sure that the rest of the world can't do anything about it. If we depend on China's genocide, how are we supposed to fight it?
Xinjiang, China is the hub of the Chinese regime's genocide against the Muslim Uyghurs. It's also a critical site for supply and production of battery materials. The panel said that the forced labor problem will only get worse as the electric vehicle market expands in the U.S.
The CCP's strategy is to undercut the civilian markets, overproduce, flood the market with products that are so cheap, so inexpensive that it kills off competition and eliminates access to these products unless you purchase from the CCP.
Now, taking action on this is Congressman John Molinar, the chairman of the House Select Committee on the CCP, which is nonpartisan. He introduced the No Goshen Act, which already has over 20 co-signers, and it would disallow any company that's tied to the Chinese Communist Party from receiving federal tax credits. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.